மறக்காம சர்ப்ரைஸ் பண்ணுங்க. Thank you.
Takes, and now queen b6. And again, it's possible to handle this position normally, just develop and attack in the queen side, play f6. But in a lot of these positions, there's crazy ideas like knight takes d4, g5, and my personal favorite, h5 and g6, getting this bishop to h6, controlling this diagonal. So that actually is going to round up our coverage of this variation with bishop e3, c3. So I think I just showed that the positions here are quite complicated, but mostly promising for black. As I mentioned at the start of the video, I've actually won all my games in this variation because, well, part of them I won because of this neat trick with b6, but also the positions here are, white is not really, I think, aware of all these potential ideas of black's sleeve. There's a lot of hidden tactical possibilities for black here, and white really needs to watch out for them. So what else can white really do here? So bishop e3, knight h6. One move that I have faced once was knight f3. And other than knight f3, we can also talk about bishop takes h6, which I believe is not a good move at all. First of all, white is wasting time in the opening with this bishop. Second of all, we're not really worried about losing this knight and getting these double pawns, because now we've already seen how powerful the bishop on a fade can be, the dark star bishop can be if it's unopposed. So what we're going to do here is, of course, it's always possible to win back the c5 pawn, but this e5 pawn is now a nice target here because the bishop can go to g7. So, for example, after knight f3, I would hold off winning this pawn, knight c6 first, and we can already consider queen c7, bishop g7, or if need be, we can always capture in c5. Never faced bishop h6, I'd love to though. But I have faced the move knight f3, which I mentioned. I faced it against a FIDE master who was over 2300, so a reasonable opponent here. And the move that I played in the game was knight to d7. So I don't really understand this move, knight f3, because it's also very possible to play the move knight to f5. And the bishop on e3 is immediately targeted. I checked the variations here. White usually plays bishop g5. But for example, after queen c7, it's hard to see what white is really trying to accomplish here. We're going to simply play possibly knight d7 here to target both pawns. Of course, I'd love to win the e5 pawn. c5 pawn is always on the cards to be eaten. Simply bishop c5, knight c6 can be natural enough. So I don't believe this variation is really a problem here. But I favor the move knight d7 in my games. The idea here is that I'm remaining flexible with the h6 knight. Maybe I'll go to f5, but maybe I'll go to g4 so I can get better target on the e5 pawn. And that is exactly what happened in this game that I ended up winning. But again, knight f3, very rare. I faced it once. I believe both knight f5 and knight d7 are quite simple ways to deal with it. So that rounds up bishop e3. So now we can have a look at the other possibilities white has here. The important alternatives here are knight f3, queen g4, and a3. And we're going to look at them in that order, with the last one, a3, being the most critical and particularly very popular option nowadays. So we'll start with knight f3, which is the easiest and quickest to cover. It's a move I faced several times. In this variation, white is just trying to develop and castle and lead a normal life. But the resulting position here is very similar. It looks like a French defense, but of course, some differences. We have played c6, c5, so we lost the tempo on that. But on the other hand, white has played d takes c5, which is not a move that he would like to play so early in the French defense, because this would concede control of the center. Now, there's two options here. The most popular way to play is to get this knight out early and put pressure on e5. But the way that I've always played and like to play is to play this move f6, immediately putting pressure on white's position. So there's three options for white here. They include taking on f6, bishop f4, and the best option of queen e2. So I'll start off with bishop f4, which falls for a known trap of g5. So this is a typical aggressive French move. Of course, you want to be careful when you're playing it. Make sure you're getting enough in return for compromising king's safety. But here it's okay. First of all, this sacrifice for white really isn't doing any good. This king is going to be quite safe after, for example, king c7 and then a6 if white is trying to jump to b5. This center is going to be very good, provide very good shelter for the king. Meanwhile, black is going to actually get quite active play, potentially on the king side. So definitely not enough for white here to sacrifice the knight. The main idea is, of course, after bishop e3, g4, knight d2, for example. Now pawn takes e5. We're gambiting away, or I shouldn't say gambiting, I should say trading away the king side for the extremely powerful center. And of course, our king is a little weak, but after knight f6 here, this should be quite okay for black. The center should be enough compensation for any worries with the king, and quite a well-known good position for black here. So another move that I face is the move pawn takes f6, and in this position white is just trying to, he doesn't really care about controlling the center with pawns, he wants to control it with pieces. After knight f6, the most testing move for white is c4, otherwise we're just going to castle and enjoy play on the in the center and on the king side. We will actually see the ideas black can employ in this position. So castles, now knight c3, not really ever worried about white taking, because after e takes, now we get this wonderful open diagonal for a bishop, and we're going to get this outpost in the center. So instead, after knight c3, we'll look at one very nice short game here between two grandmasters, maybe an idea that is going to be quite useful for you in the future, where black plays this move queen to d6. So the idea of queen d6 will become quite apparent, but simply trying to target white's king side a little bit. In this game, white was completely unaware of what black was planning. Played bishop g5, and now black struck with knight g4. So again, the threat is rook takes f3, and then the checkmate on h2. So instead, white played h3 here, but this was met with a very brutal and awesome finish here. Knight to d4, knight, pawn takes g4, knight takes f3, takes queen g3 using the pin, and a very quick, miniature, fantastic win. Of course, in this position, the king is completely falling apart. There's queen g4, and of course, rook g3 is simply mate in one, so white resigned. So again, taking on f6 is not very dangerous here. Black gets very good play in the center on the king side. So again, the most critical move here is queen to e2. The idea here is white wants to maintain a blocking on the e5 square, try to keep these pawns under control, try to keep this bishop back. But here, I had known this idea for quite a long time here. Black is able to solve his problems with a little bit of a tactic here. So takes, queen takes. So this is important. We want to lure this queen to e5 because it will be easy to target and push away. Knight f6. And now it was considered, or one move we can look at for white is knight to d2, trying to play knight f3 and continue this blockade. If bishop b5, it's well known that it's not really a problem, because after king f7, rook f8, king g8, white will, rather black will castle by hand, no problem at all, and we're going to gain some timing as this bishop if need be, and this queen is ready to get pushed out, so not really a worry here. So I want to show you a nice idea after knight d2, castles, knight to f3, bishop d6, queen e2, queen c7, fighting for control over e5, rook e1, and in this position it's possible to play bishop d7 and then try to play like rook e8, or maybe bishop e8 in some positions, or try to knight g4, knight h5. This is an option to keep more pieces on the board, but a well-known way to sort of equalize here is to play e5. So a surprising move here, pawn sacrifice. Of course, knight e5 is forced, and now rook e8. So two options for white here. There's f4, which we'll look at in a second. We'll start off with bishop f4, which is actually quite dangerous for white here, because now at the price of a pawn, he's facing this nasty pin. And black has an awesome idea here. This move, bishop to g4, connecting the rooks here, developing with tempi, and making sure that this knight on e5, of course the knight on e5 can't move because of the pin. So the cool idea here is that if white goes f3, then knight h5 is extremely powerful here, and white is in trouble because this pin is this cross pin here is going to be very hard to deal with. And if queen e3, then black can even play calmly with rook e7, followed by rook e8, and increasing the pressure. And there's also a simple move like knight d7 here, adding pressure against the knight. So bishop f4 is actually quite troublesome for white, potentially. So f4 is preferable. And now knight g4, simply putting more pressure on this knight, trying to regain it. And rook f1, this happened in the game, let's play this variation. And black decided to take immediately on e5 here. But a simple improvement here could be just bishop d7, knight is not going anywhere at all, and black is going to take this knight back next move basically, and will potentially save a tempo, or gain a tempo on this development. Completely fine position for black here. I quickly check the move queen f3, potentially getting out of the pin, targeting the pawn. However, after takes, takes on e5, queen c5 check, defending the pawn, king h1, knight e5. Position is going to be equal. We're probably going to be in an opposite color bishop position where the chances are quite balanced. So that deals really with knight f3, which is a move that, again, I learned a long time ago. I had to check it because it was it was an option that was on the cards, but simply learning these ideas and understanding the type of position that arises, I haven't really had to go back and check on what's going on here. So that leads us to our next move, queen to g. I faced this move a couple of times. It's a pretty reasonable option. White wants to disturb our development, not let us really capture this c5 pawn comfortably. And the move that I've preferred on most occasions has been h5, which is a common, I think the most popular move here and a very common recommendation. Simply trying to chase this queen away from targeting this pawn. Now, for example, if queen f4, then after bishop takes c5, bishop d3, knight c6, black has a pretty normal French-looking game. Of course, this pawn in h5 can be a strength or weakness. It does weaken our king side a little bit, but if we do get our pawns moving down the board here in some positions, it can be helpful. Also, it can be helpful at helping us establish a knight on f5 in some cases. An idea here that I've been seeing is after knight f3, black has played this move knight b4 here with decent results, trying to get rid of this bishop and then potentially install this knight on somewhere on the light squares. That's a reasonable idea. More in the spirit of the position is for white to play queen g3, keeping in touch with this pawn on g7. But now there's a nice idea for black here. h4, queen g4, and knight h6. So continuing to harass this queen. White has given up this bishop in most games reached in this position. And of course, black still hasn't regained the pawn, but again, we have this typical situation. We have the two bishops in return. And knight f3, there's been quite a decent amount of moves played here, but I found a relatively new idea here. I think there's a lot of good moves for black here, but I like a6 here, which seems a little slow. But the idea here is we simply want to play knight c6 without being bothered by any of these pins here, or any of the knight jumps to d6. It's a useful move that is going to help us continue development. For example, after bishop d3, we can go knight c6, and if knight d2, queen c7, the e5 pawn is already hard to protect. Whereas after a move like castles, black has a surprising idea here of playing f5, taking advantage that this queen is going to be sort of under pressure from the bishop on c8. And if white plays a move like queen f4, then bishop c5, and white needs to watch out for potential g5 ideas coming at some point here. So I really like this position for black here. Of course, if white plays a move like pawn en passant, queen f6 is going to be annoying for white. Bishop c5 is now in the cards. Some positions the b2 pawn is hanging. We also have a strong center, and there's potential ideas of course, playing on the king side always, h3 moves. In general, quite a nice game here for black. So queen g4 could give it more attention here, but again, not a very critical move in my opinion, and black can sort of get away with the normal game. Playing reasonable moves. I've been successful with playing knight d7 here as well, if you're not in the mood for a weird, wacky looking move like h5. But h5 is a pretty good option though. So that leaves us, we've covered bishop e3, knight f3, and also now queen g4, so it leaves us with the final option of a3, which looks like an unassuming move, but is quite important to look at, and has been scoring very, very favorably for white in the recent years.
Now the idea behind a3 is quite evident. White simply wants to play b4 right now or in the future. And the main idea behind this queenside expansion is white wants to gain some space, but also position this bishop on b2 where it will be quite effective defending this pawn on e5. And one of black's very common plans of this structure is to play the move f6. And of course the bishop on b2 is going to be very well positioned to deal with this strike. So this move a3 has recently been gaining a lot of attention, has been getting quite popular, and it's really rising through the ranks of theory in this line. So it's quite challenging, and I had to take quite a deep look at this variation. And I have proposed two solutions for you, one that is sort of more established and another surprising idea. Now, as I already mentioned, this variation is getting quite popular now, and white is scoring pretty well. It's a relatively new line, so both white players and black players are trying to establish the main theoretical roads, and both sides are experimenting and testing out various different ideas. So here I'm going to quickly summarize what I'm going to look at. The main variation runs knight c6, knight f3, bishop c5, b4, bishop b6, bishop d3, or bishop b2, and this is exactly the setup that I have just described. White is expanding on the queen side. He gets his bishop in the long diagonal. And white is very complacent to just play moves like bishop d3, knight d2, castles, rook e1, fortify this e5 pawn, maybe later consider c4. And the reason why I think black's results have been so poor in this variation is that when white first started playing this way, it's not very easy to see what plan black should undertake, and a lot of the games, black would sort of just develop pieces like knight.
மறக்காம சர்ப்ரைஸ் பண்ணுங்க. Thank you.